Good morning, all. It's February 17th, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily live show that runs from 11:30 till around 1 o'clock every day, Monday to Friday on Mountain Standard Time. I got a good one coming up today, as always. A couple of good guests. And of course, there's just so much going on right now. I mean, with the Emergencies Act being declared, with the protests coming, going, arrests, all sorts of stuff happening. Comments are, of course, welcome. It's one of the good things I like, hey there, Beverly, about doing this live so we can interact. I can get some feedback from you guys, see what you want to hear or what you don't want to hear. I won't always necessarily listen to you, but I do appreciate the feedback either way. And you can talk with each other in the comment scroll as well. It's nice to see discussions going on. Just, keep it civil, of course, no spamming and no calling each other names too roughly. We can be a little bit triggered, but we do want to be somewhat polite. First, when I get to my guest, it's going to be Michael Wagner. He's been on before. He's an author in Alberta. He has a PhD in political science, and he's written a number of books. Hey there, Gills. I'm terrible with the French names. But Michael and I are going to be talking about how all these activities and everything are impacting demand and need for Western independence. I suspect a lot of us around here are feeling more of that need than ever. After that, I'm going to have a really interesting guest on as well, which is Spike Cohen. He was the vice presidential candidate in the last American election for the Libertarian Party in the States. And I know they've got the two-party system. The chances of him winning the presidency were very slight, but the Libertarian Party down there and movement is a heck of a lot stronger than what it is up here in Canada. So it'll be good to get that American perspective, though, because we've made so much American news over the insanity going on up here. Unfortunately, most of it negative and quite embarrassing. But yes, Spike is going to lend that perspective to us. So before I start into my rant, and I've got one going, I'm triggered as usual today, and Trudeau is the subject of it. Let's talk about our sponsors, though. Those are the ones that fund us here at Triggered so I can do these rants. And that's Bitcoin Well. And digital currencies have been a big discussion lately. You know, the government is coming to steal the money from citizens. They're trying their very hardest. They're getting into regular bank accounts. It's frightening what they're getting up to. But as much as they keep talking about it, if you've got your own Bitcoin wallet, they can't get into it. It's your wallet, a cold wallet. These guys will explain what that's all about if you're looking into getting into digital currencies. That's part of their service. They never hold on to your funds or money either. It's non-custodial. They will just facilitate you purchasing it and getting it involved in the digital currency world. They're a publicly traded company. They're out of Western Canada. They've even got ATMs out here in the West. You can go on their site and see the map of where they're all at, where you could deposit funds into your Bitcoin account anytime you want. Check them out, bitcoinwell.com. They offer a great service, and it's time to get away from the Canadian banking system. Okay, well, let's talk. The Truckers for Freedom convoy has truly brought Justin Trudeau's nature to light. And I don't mean the vacuous frat boy who trips on his tongue and spends more time deciding which socks to wear than he does on policy. I mean the angry, vindictive little man that he is. The insecure, petty elitism has been virtually dripping from him for weeks now. The trust fund child who would be king hit new lows yesterday when he accused a Jewish descendant of Holocaust survivors of being aligned with Nazis. The words from his mouth are indicative of his idiocy, but his refusal to even consider apologizing for uttering them is indicative of his malignancy, and that's more concerning. Trudeau has a history of ill behavior when it comes to women. In August of 2000, Trudeau had been reported as having groped and inappropriately handled a female reporter at a music festival. I'm sure we remember when that came up. When confronted by that newspaper on it, from the reporter, Trudeau literally said, "I'm sorry, if I'd have known you were reporting for a national paper, I never would have been so forward." Trudeau wasn't sorry for inappropriately groping a young woman. He was only sorry that she turned out to have a large platform from which she could speak about it. Had it been just a run-of-the-mill commoner, I'm sure it would have been just perfectly fine in his eyes. When confronted about this story in Trudeau 18, Trudeau said, "Who knows where her mind was, and I fully respect her ability to experience something differently." Yeah, that's what he said. I'm sure we remember that. He respects her ability to experience something differently. How condescending. What was he trying to say? Sounds like one of those roundabout ways of saying she was asking for it. Or maybe she just didn't know what was good for her. Hey, you've got the hunky Trudeau coming on to you. You're experiencing it differently, but you're wrong. This is not acceptable. Or maybe he was accusing her of being drunk. The concept of apologizing and saying perhaps that, hey, he was a young drunk idiot at the time who had a terrible and disrespectful lack of judgment never occurred to him for a second, though. Yes, it would be a humbling admission, but people could accept it. Hey, a lot of people have done stupid things in their youth while drinking at festivals, perhaps. Again, it doesn't make it a good thing to do, but if you apologize, it shows that you've moved on. Seems to have saved him in the cases of his chronic use of blackface. Trudeau will never admit to being wrong on something, though, particularly when it comes to his interactions with strong women. He has no respect for that young woman in any manner at all. A list of former female MPs in his caucus calling him out for his behavior is an embarrassment. Jody Wilson-Raybould was drummed out of cabinet and eventually the party when she refused to bend to pressure to cut a deal with Liberal buddies SNC-Lavalin, and that pressure was coming from the Prime Minister's office. She later released a book called Indian in the Cabinet, where she documented Trudeau's mistreatment of others and herself at length. In March of 2019, again, Cabinet Minister Jane Philpott resigned from cabinet over Trudeau's behavior. Trudeau said he respected her decision. Less than a month later, she was kicked out of the entire Liberal caucus. Liberal MP Selena Caesar Chavanis said she'd been treated as a token in Liberals caucus, trotted out for, in her words, my blackness, to greet visiting black leaders, but was otherwise ignored. When she told him she wouldn't seek re-election, he exploded, she said, and accused her of failing to appreciate all he'd done for her. She says, he was speaking to me like a child, like someone he happens to own. That's Trudeau. Who could forget his epic temper tantrum when he raged across the floor of the House of Commons and elbowed NDP MP Ruth Ellen Brasseau in the breast? Look up that video when you get a chance. You'll see a man totally out of control of himself, who saw a woman in front of him as nothing more than an obstacle to be shoved roughly out of the way. As a self-styled feminist, Trudeau has proven himself to be one of the worst and most disrespectful leaders we've ever seen when it comes to women. As a person who considers himself to be woke, he's the only Canadian politician who's ever been seen wearing blackface, not once, but multiple times. He's a serial blackface wearer. Wearer, is that a word? It works all the same for him. Trudeau's as fake as a $3 bill. If he's not carefully guided and scripted, the real Trudeau leaks out, and it's ugly when we see it. Trudeau's lost control, and rather than trying to respond to these pressures through introspection, consultation, and carefully crafted policy, he's chosen to try and take dictatorial powers through the invocation of the Emergencies Act. There's no need to suspend the civil rights of Canadians at this time. I don't like the idea of any person being given unfettered power to override the rights of Canadians, whether it's an emergency or not. Giving it to somebody like Justin Trudeau, though, this kind of power is terrifying. Trudeau's far too shallow, angry, and unstable to wield such power responsibly. He's not just stupid, but he is. He's dangerously so. He's shown no regard for the well-being of fellow citizens once he deems them to be beneath him, and he seems to think just about everybody's beneath him these days. Let's hope he's blocked in his efforts to try and crush a peaceful protest with the Emergencies Act. If it isn't, a precedent's going to be set, and rest assured, the little tyrant won't hesitate to use such actions again. We've got a few days to stop him, guys. Let's hope that we do. Okay, that's what's got me triggered today. A good one to get the blood pressure out. Let's check in on the newsroom. I'm sure there'll be a few other things that our news editor, Dave Naylor, can tell us about that will get me triggered further. Hey, Dave, how's it going over there?
Not too bad, Cory. Look, I don't want to upset you any further. I'm a bit worried about your blood pressure.
Oh, yes. Well, I get a cuff on after the show and triple check it and make sure I'm keeping my sodium down and all that. But,
Awesome. Yeah, we've got some good stuff, if I do say so myself, on the site this morning. The lead story at the moment is a very emotional one about a Manitoba dad who's also a trucker. He's got a 9-year-old special needs daughter, who's in palliative care. She's a very sick young girl. He's not vaccinated, and he's not been able to go in and see her for months and months and months now. So as a trucker, he went down to the Emerson blockade earlier in the week and helped blockade that border crossing, fighting for his freedoms, he says. He just wants to be able to hold his little girl again, and it's a very emotional story on a very emotional issue. So I urge everybody to check that one out. It's leading the site right now. The most ridiculous story of the week is also on the site now. You remember the story about MyPillow CEO Lindell being turned back at the border, trying to bring 10,000 pillows into the country for the truckers in Ottawa. He didn't meet the COVID-19 entry requirements. Now his plan is to take the 10,000 pillows and drop them into Ottawa via helicopter, believe it or not, attached to tiny parachutes that will slowly waft them through the sky and land softly on Ottawa streets. So he says it's going to happen. It's not just a stunt, but I'll believe it when I see that one. The Liberals have snubbed Queen Elizabeth's 70th Platinum Jubilee this June. She becomes the longest serving monarch in history. And while the governments of the day have issued medals for her last jubilees, the diamond and the golden, they're not doing it this time. They urge Canadians to celebrate the platinum jubilee their own way. No reason has been given for the medal snub. Tamara Litch, the organizer of the trucker convoy down in Ottawa, posted a very emotional video saying that she expects to be behind bars by the end of the day and having her 3 square meals a day provided for her. She's very emotional, says, still vowing not to leave, but you can go onto her site and watch that entire video there. Obviously, we're all dealing with the Emergencies Act again today, Cory. It's being debated in the Commons as we speak. Whether it passes or not, it will be down to the NDP. They hold the balance of power in a minority government. The last time it was brought in 1970, the NDP and their leader then, Tommy Douglas, did not support it. That was during the FLQ crisis, and the NDP is being pressured by the Bloc not to join with the Liberals to get this motion passed. So it's going to be an interesting vote. It may not happen until Monday, but we'll be keeping an eye on it. And for something completely different, if you're tired of truckers and you just want to get away from it all for a while, our real estate guy, Mike Thomas, has an excellent feature on a house for sale in California, all yours for about $1/3 billion. It's 375 million Canadian, and the house has got to be seen to believed. There's some pictures of it and a description of it on the website this morning. So yeah, lots of stuff for the readers and viewers to check out. This morning, I don't want to give anything away, but this afternoon, I think you may even play a bit of it on your show today, Cory. But Yellowstone, the television drama that's just so popular, rating top of the charts. One of their actors, his name is Forrest Smith. He plays the crusty cowboy Lloyd, and he's been nominated for a Screen Actors Guild Award, which the ceremony is next week. Because he's unvaccinated, he's not allowed to attend the ceremony. So he's put out a video statement in his cowboy duds explaining his stand and why he won't be at the show. So Mel Risden is putting that together as we speak, and it will be up shortly. So yeah, lots of good stuff to come, Cory.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Well, always busy news days, but I guess if it was dull, we wouldn't be able to stay in business. So I appreciate you keeping on it, and I'll let you get back to it.
Thanks, Cory. Take care.
Thanks. So yeah, I'd love a house worth, $300 and some million myself. I mean, I can't imagine. It's probably got like 20 bathrooms. Wouldn't it be great to, for weeks at a time, get to go out and use a brand new bathroom every morning, day after day? I don't know. These are little things in life that make me happy, the sort of stuff I like. Maybe those other aren't priorities for people. Derek would have to give me a substantial raise to even start thinking about that. But, the way to get there is to subscribe. That's how we pay our bills. So kind of remind everybody, the stories Dave's talking about, they're all on the westernstandardonline.com. You can see them in full. You can get the details on them. And the columns, all sorts of exclusive content, guys, from Dave. Melanie Risden just does a fantastic work, all sorts of stuff out there. Amber up in Edmonton, Reed in BC. We've just got a great crew put together, and we rely on members for it. And the membership has been fantastic. We got new members signing up all the time. It's $10 a month, $99 for a year, 2 weeks for free if you're trying it out. And trust me, like as we watch our stats carefully, 95% of the people who try it out for 2 weeks, they keep that subscription going. They realize it's well worth that $10 a month. I'm going to need a heck of a lot more subscribers before I can buy that house yet. But in the meantime, it still keeps us running and keeping the news things going. I'll get on to our next sponsor, too, since I've got a moment here, and that's the Canada Shooting Sports Association. Their name kind of says it all. They've been sponsoring us for some time. And these are, of course, a freedom-loving sort of organization. They want to stand up for and protect your right and ability to safely, responsibly, legally use firearms. You know, target shooting, hunting, collecting, whatever you want. It's not really anybody's business what you do with them if you're not harming somebody. But a lot of people seem to feel, I mean, it's a lot like with this whole pandemic thing. They got to look over the fence. They got to worry about what their neighbor's doing, and they demand the Liberals take away those firearms. You know, we're hearing the ads on the radio even from the government talk about how they're making us all safe by taking a whole bunch of assault-style rifles and firearms out of people's hands. You got to remember that terminology, assault style. It's not even assault weapons. It's just if they look scary to a Liberal, they will illegalize them, and then they will steal your property, and that's what they're trying to do. So the Canada Shooting Sports Association has multiple legal challenges up on behalf of Canadians to stand up for your right and ability to have those firearms. So check them out. Take out a subscription with these guys. They are, you know, be a member with them, and be sure to support them so they can help you. And since that was brought up, maybe if Nico has it on deck, maybe we could play that video from Yellowstone. Okay, so we're going to play that because I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and how we're seeing some interesting things. This is, I mean, people are huge fans of that show. It's really big. And this fella put out a statement about why he won't be attending an awards ceremony. And it ties into a much bigger issue. So let's give this a watch.
Hey, I want to apologize to y'all for not being at the Screen Actors Guild Awards. I mean, no offense to anyone. I'm not vaccinated, and it's a requirement to be vaccinated to be at the Screen Actors Guild Awards ceremony. You have to be vaccinated with a booster shot and a negative COVID test within 48 hours, and got to wear a K95, 62, 43, 50, whatever kind of mask. And I'm not vaccinated. I will not get vaccinated. I haven't been vaccinated since I was a little kid. I don't vaccinate my dogs. I don't vaccinate my horses. I've never had a flu shot. I never will. I believe they compromise your immunities. And man, I'm sorry. I was sure looking forward to walking down the red carpet in my big black American hat and my Justin boots and representing my culture and heritage. But I'm not going to be able to do that. And I apologize to all y'all out there that are part of my culture and heritage. I won't be representing us at the Screen Actors Guild Awards walking down the red carpet. But it's no offense to anybody, anything. It's just my beliefs that I just don't believe in that stuff. And whatever. Thank y'all. Y'all enjoy watching the show anyway, and maybe next year we get on that red carpet. Thank y'all, and God bless.
You know, if you do watch Yellowstone, you can see that's one of those examples. And that's an interesting thing with a lot of their cast members. They get a lot of real outright cowboys on there. They aren't just career actor types and everything. I mean, that's his real character. That's who he is. But what I want to go into a little deeper, what's bigger out of this whole thing is this is what's happening to people. I mean, you can see it. You can hear it from him. You can hear it from many others. There are people who do not want to be vaccinated, and they are not going to. Everybody is willing to get vaccinated, has been vaccinated. It's done. It's done. Those who want to go get boosted are going to go get boosted. Quit pressuring and ruining the lives of people who chose otherwise. This guy is giving up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go to an awards show. You could tell he really wanted to go to it. He loves his show. He loves his craft as an actor, but he won't go. He won't get vaccinated to do it. As we were talking about, there's people who have difficulty seeing their children because they're not going to get vaccinated, and their children, the only way to access them in palliative care is with a vaccination. There are people who've given up their jobs all across the country because they don't want to get vaccinated. This is causing real human harm, and nothing is going to convince them otherwise. So accept that nothing will convince them otherwise. Accept their choice, even if their choice differs from yours. Like, that's where this discussion it needs to be shifting more and more, that people should have this right to choose. We can't be letting this carry on like this, chasing them around, villainizing them. I mean, again, and vaccinated people, quit worrying about your neighbor. If you're vaccinated, good. I'm vaccinated. I'm okay with it. But I'm okay with somebody else choosing not to. It's not that complicated, or it shouldn't be. But now we have a prime minister. Boy, what a prime minister. Who would rather invoke the Emergencies Act than even consider talking to protesters, respecting protesters who want to see some unreasonable, I mean, that's what it all started with, unreasonable vaccine mandates removed. They weren't asking, I mean, yeah, they point to some other people who had these demands to pull them out of government and everything else. Look, the vast majority of people there just want the mandates gone. They're done with it. But no, he's dug in his heels. It's become more and more divisive, and it's causing damage, and it's harming people. So I've got a guest here, Michael Wagner, coming in. I might as well bring him on. He's been on before. It's always great talking to him. Hey, Michael, thank you very much. I should explain to the audience, you came on a last-minute notice. We had to do a schedule change. It's part of the fun of being live. I was looking to grab you next week anyways because I wanted to see what happened after the weekend, but we can still talk today.
Thanks for having me on, Cory. Can you hear me properly?
I do, yeah. You're coming in quite clearly.
Great.
And I mentioned it at the start of the show, and just that reminder. So Michael's got a PhD in political science. He's from you're up in Edmonton still, or?
Yeah, Edmonton, yes.
Yes, and you've been an author of a number of books, and definitely calling out quite strongly in support of Western independence, particularly Alberta's. And well, I always, of course, as an independent supporter, appreciate your outlook.
Thank you.
So I guess what I want to kind of tie in, though, we're seeing a country in crisis. I mean, the nation is in a state like we've never seen in our adult lives. We might see the Emergency Act declared. There's no Western province aside from BC, I guess, that supports the declaration of this. Do you think this is going to entrench, whenever this is all settled, it'd have to be eventually more support for Western independence?
I think it'll encourage those who already support it to support it more strongly. I mean, of course, Justin Trudeau, those of us in the independence movement, we remember Pierre Trudeau and the damage that he did to Alberta, and his son has really picked up the torch from his father to continue to the damage to Western Canada. So many of us already supported independence even before the Emergencies Act was declared, and these various other things that Trudeau is doing, were being done. But I think this will help to cement the support among some independent supporters, to realize there's really no going back. I mean, Justin Trudeau will eventually, retire or lose an election or something, and we might get a better leader for a little while. But after that period of time, we'll end up with another person like a Justin Trudeau or a Pierre Trudeau. This is a cyclical kind of a thing. Sometimes we get reasonable leaders like Harper who are more favorable to the West, but it always returns to another anti-Western leader. I mean, and when you see how bad some of these guys are, like Justin Trudeau and Pierre Trudeau, well, Justin is showing, the kind of things he's doing now, he's worse than we ever thought he was before. And we're just going to get more people like this. I mean, Mark Carney, who's considered to be one of the people who might succeed Justin Trudeau, he had a column on the Globe and Mail last week, calling the protest a sedition and calling for, a sharp crackdown on it. So, once Justin is gone, we'll get a Mark Carney or someone like that who's very much of the same mind. The only way we can get away from these kind of leaders is for Alberta or for Western Canada, to become independent. So I think that people should be thinking that way. This crisis will come to an end. Justin Trudeau will eventually be gone, but we're going to end up eventually with someone just like him again. So, rather than continuing to go through these patterns of cyclical leaders from time to time who are very much opposed to Western Canadian interests, we really need to move toward becoming independent ourselves. And that'll give us an opportunity to select better leaders. I mean, we won't always get good leaders. That's just the way society works. But I think this should emphasize to people that being connected to central Canada, where Justin Trudeau gets most of his votes, it's just going to bring Alberta down. It's kind of like an anchor pulling us down. So I think it should increase support for Western independence. I sure hope so. Yeah,
well, and as you're saying, it would certainly entrench the ones who are already there. I don't think anybody, once they've crossed that line personally, they don't go back. But it's the chance of new people examining it. Like I think, as you're saying, we can change out the face that's at the head of the government, but a lot of people now are looking at the government and realizing the system's broken. So, I mean, it doesn't matter who you put in the front. If the system's broken, they can and will abuse you. And people are examining the system with a critical eye. Again, I think a lot of people probably who never considered Western independence and that sort of thing before, but it's over this whole, mandates issue. and then they'll start perhaps coming to the same conclusions that we have. Like, wow, I can't fix this broken engine. It's got to be torn down and rebuilt.
Yeah, and my impression too is like with the whole convoy idea, I think started in the West, and it started up here, and then it caught on across the country. But early on, some of the Eastern media was criticizing it for being like a Western separatist thing or something along that line. It was seen as some kind of a Western protest movement, and I do think there is more support for this kind of thing in the West. Like there is somewhat of a cultural difference between Western Canada and Eastern Canada. We have more of a culture of protesting against the mainstream parties, not just this convoy, but other things in the past, like the Reform Party. We are different. And the only way that this difference can really benefit us is if we have our own country, if we can, vote in our own leaders rather than being tied to Central Canada, because ultimately, every federal government is determined by the voters of Central Canada. And as long as we're tied to them, we're going to get their kinds of leaders rather than the kinds of leaders that we want out here. I mean, our voting patterns, especially in the last, for many years, actually, Alberta votes, overwhelmingly conservative and has for generations, actually, if you include the Reform Party and so on. So we would select very different leaders than the kind of leaders that are being selected in Central Canada. And so by being independent, it would really give us an opportunity to get the kind of leadership that we want rather than being put under the kind of leadership that Central Canada wants to have.
Yeah, well, and something else that came out from that, as you said, as the convoy was starting to pick up steam and it started in the West, it was moving, and the establishment at first tried to ignore it, the usual thing, the Laurentian elites, they just didn't even want to admit that this was happening. Once they realized this is starting to get big, well, one of the first areas where they start shooting outwards was to dismiss it as a Western thing. And that shows a little bit of the underlying attitude. Like if we can tell the rest of Canadians, it's just those Westerners, just those Westerners. This isn't serious. This isn't real. We shouldn't give these guys the time of day. Again, it helps exemplify that attitude that we have from the people who manage this country right now.
Yeah, absolutely. If something is seen as coming from the West, whether it's this convoy or like when the Reform Party started out, it's just dismissed as something not to be taken seriously. It's just some kind of fringe minority, that we don't really have to take seriously. But out here, these are the majority views. And so if we had our own country, we would have a very different form of government, in terms of the kind of leadership that we'd have. But like you said, I mean, anything that's seen as coming from the West or starting from the West is dismissed in Central Canada as not being something to take credibly.
Yeah, and our system is just so ill in so many ways. I used to work a lot in the States. I'm going to be talking actually to an American political commentator a little later in the show. And one of the things, a few of the things when I would talk to them down there, that they'd just be staggered by, with the parliamentary system. Like, what do you mean you don't elect senators? It's inconceivable to them. These are powerful people that you're putting in a role of running your country, and you don't get a chance to vote on them. No. Or fixed election dates. What do you mean the leader picks and chooses when an election is going to be called? I mean, doesn't that give them a gross advantage? Yes, it does. And that's just a couple of the examples. But their system was born out of revolution, and it shows because they built a lot of checks and balances to protect the citizens from the government, as opposed to kind of Canada where it's the other way around. People might realize that the way to get a system that stands up more for the individual, for democracy, things like that, is how could come from a Western independent state.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be very different from the system now if we were independent. But what's quite remarkable about the American system in comparison to the Canadian system, there was a book written actually about 40 years ago by Professor Roger Gibbons at the University of Calgary. He compared how the American system and the Canadian system have evolved over time. What's interesting is the American system was originally designed to be very decentralized. The states had lots of power. The federal government had relatively little power. But over time, the federal government in the United States has increased its power in relation to the states. And part of this was because they had such a good method of regional representation. The regions did not feel threatened by the federal government, because each state has 2 senators and they're all, each state has an equal amount regardless of the population. The states themselves feel that they are properly represented within the central institution, within the central government. Whereas Canada was actually originally designed to be more centralist, but because we didn't have any way to represent our regional interests in the federal government, the provinces became increasingly powerful over time. So our representation would not be like senators in the central government. It would be our premiers. Our premiers became our spokespersons rather than having senators within the central institutions. And that was an evolution that took place over time. And that book by Roger Gibbons is quite interesting about how that evolved. And so theoretically, Canada would not have to have gone in the same kind of direction that it has, with the Western provinces being so underrepresented in the federal institutions. We could have had a better system, but I mean, we're not going to get change. The only way we can get change is by becoming independent. I mean, we've had various reform movements, in the West, like the Reform Party, the Tripoli Senate idea, and so on. These are, as we just mentioned earlier, they're dismissed because they are Western ideas. And so they're not taken seriously in Central Canada. We're not going to get those kind of reforms that we would need to have proper representation. So what we'd have to do is become independent, and then we'll get the kind of government that we can really rely on for the West.
Yeah, well, and that's it. And we're just, further centralizing ourselves all the time because it's politically expedient for the people who want to take power. And this trend can't be turned around. And, there's that great irony that the countries with the least amount of separatist movements are looking at, I don't even like that word, I should say, independence movements, though, are ones that decentralize power. Switzerland, 4 languages, 26 cantons. You don't hear of any of those cantons trying to break away because they're comfortable with their local independent governing. They're doing great. The Soviet Union centralized power for decades by force. And I mean, as soon as they lost a bit of power, it fell apart and they went right back to being countries. That this idea that you can make a stronger, more unified country through centralizing power is always a failure.
That's right. And, that really points to Alberta's situation because as long as Alberta was a poor province, Ottawa basically didn't pay a lot of attention. It was when the oil prices went up in the 1970s, suddenly Pierre Trudeau was quite interested in Alberta and interested in taking our resources away. This was at the time in the 1970s, we didn't realize that oil was going to last so long. We thought it was going to be a short-term thing. And so we as Albertans, like Peter Lougheed said, we need to get as much money out of this as we can right now because we're going to run out of oil and we need to build for the future. We have to diversify our economy. So when Pierre Trudeau came in and artificially pushed down the price of oil and also put on some illegal taxes to take the money, that reduced the amount of money that Alberta could accumulate for the future. And that was because, if we had been more centralized or decentralized, if we'd had more power over our resources, he could not have done that. And it's the same or a similar situation with Justin Trudeau. He wants to shut down our oil industry for, the purpose of preventing climate change. If we were more decentralized and had, theoretically, we have power over our natural resources, but somehow he's using, these the climate taxes and so on that are being supported by the Supreme Court. That's violating our regional autonomy or our provincial autonomy as Albertans, and it's leading to increasing centralization. As you say, it's because they're exercising these centralizing powers that Alberta is being damaged. And if we had a more decentralized system where Alberta could take advantage of our resources without the federal government trying to shut us down or trying to take our money, it might be possible for Alberta to remain within Canada and still thrive. But that's not the way the system is. And so we need to become independent if we want to thrive.
Yeah, well, and the Supreme Court system, and the appointments there and such, again, show that it's not a good and valid check or balance for regional freedoms when the time comes. I mean, it's still dominated by the center, and it's going to rule that way. It's not a place for, we can't look for relief from them, I'm afraid.
Actually, that's a really good point. In Canada, the Supreme Court justices are appointed by the Prime Minister himself. So he's going to appoint justices who are, lean his way with regard to, regional issues and so on. In the United States, the Supreme Court justices have to face the Senate. They have to be confirmed by the Senate. So they have to be voted on, by senators from states that have very small populations like Wyoming or Idaho. Anyway, they can't just choose a centralist Supreme Court justice and assume he's going to get through because he has to face the Senate vote. And that's completely different from Canada, where the Prime Minister gets to select the nominee and the Supreme Court justice. So the Prime Minister can select the most centralist justice he wants, and there's going to be nobody who can stop him. Whereas in the United States, senators could stop him if they wanted to, the nominee.
Yeah, we terribly lack checks and balances. And I mean, we're in such a tumultuous time. I'm just trying to I'm really worried for the weekend and what's going to happen over there and as these days pass. But I mean, I'm just hoping, I guess, if any positive can come out of all of this mess, Canadians who are typically docile, we're seeing that they've been less docile than ever lately, but now we'll actually start re-examining their system, looking with a critical eye at it. Like, we can learn from this in hindsight and maybe actually make positive change going forward. I mean, they're being exposed to how broken our system is in a direct way like they've never seen before.
Yeah, that's for sure. The system is broken. It doesn't work for Alberta. It hasn't worked for Alberta for decades. And I'll just keep beating my drum here that the solution for these problems, whether it's the problems of the 1970s or the problems of climate change policies or the problems of Trudeau enacting the Emergencies Act, the solution to all these is for Alberta to become independent.
Well, you won't get an argument out of me there. Before I let you go, then where can we find the books you've written on this and keep track of what you're up to there, Michael?
Oh, thank you for asking. My most recent book is this one, No Other Option, Self-Determination for Alberta. This is available on Amazon.ca as well as a local Alberta business called merchantship.ca. And my previous book on Alberta separatism or Alberta independence movement, this is a history of the movement. And it is available at the website of merchantship.ca. If you search my name there or search Alberta, this will come up. Merchantship.ca. That's a local Alberta business that sells homeschooling and educational materials. So the books are available on those two places. So hopefully people will be interested in this topic. Thank you for putting up the graphic.
Oh yeah, no, Nico does an awesome job when he sees stuff.
Yes.
I mean, this guy is on it. So yes, thank you, Nico, and thank you very much, Michael. I'm sure hope some folks get out, and yes, they're great books. I've read them both. I'm quite familiar, particularly with that first one, and we're looking forward to talking to you again and seeing how things develop.
Great, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to talk to you, Cory.
Great, thanks, Michael. Have a good one.
You too.
Okay, so just a reminder, it's Michael Wagner, and yes, he's been a very well-spoken and diligent person promoting independence and, reasoning, laying it out why and how we have to get there and what has to be done, and the history of it, as he said in his first book, which included even a naive 29-year-old Independence Party leader back at the end of the 90s who tried to make his go of it there at that time. It's been an ongoing thing, and that's part of it. We need to read that history of it so we don't keep running in circles with this movement and not getting somewhere. Let's learn from our past efforts and move forward. So again, maybe we'll get a bit of a positive out of these crazy times right now, and that'll be, I think, an increased push to change the system. And I don't see any other way to change the system aside from a country breaking out. If people want to try and convince me that we can get the formula for provinces and people together to actually rewrite the Constitution, by all means, let's have that debate. But I lived through Charlottetown and Meech Lake, and it didn't look like there was a hope, and those changes weren't even big enough. So before I get on to my next guest, I do want to talk then about what's going on in Canada. We're being internationally embarrassed, and from our prime minister. And I mentioned it earlier in my rant. Trudeau referring across the House, trying to label a Jewish person as a Nazi supporter. I mean, you have to hear his words for himself. So we should have the video on deck, and we'll play that from the House of Commons. It's only a minute or two, and you can see the question asked and Trudeau's response, and then we're going to talk about that.
Optimistic, hopeful vision for public life isn't a naive dream. It can be a powerful force for change. If Canadians are to trust their government needs to trust Canadians. Those are the words of the Prime Minister in 2015. These people, very often misogynistic, racist, women haters, science deniers, the fringe. Same Prime Minister 6 years later as he fans the flames of an unjustified national emergency. So, Mr. Speaker, when did the Prime Minister lose his way? When did it happen?
Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag. We will choose to stand with Canadians who deserve to be able to get to their jobs, who be able to get their lives back. These illegal protests need to stop, and they will, Mr. Speaker.
I just want to remind the honourable members, including the Right Honourable Prime Minister, to use words that are not inflammatory in the House. And that's for both sides.
Unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. And you could see why the House exploded, because most of them there were smarter than our moron of a prime minister. They knew who he was addressing and what he had said. If you looked at the background, you watched those kinds of things. Normally, the other Liberal backbenchers will all stand up and clap and cheer him on. You saw one or two get up, but mostly even the Liberals realized, oh my God, the moron leading me just implied that a Jewish member is a Nazi. Now, you got to think of just how grossly offensive and insensitive that is. Her name is Melissa Lantzman. She's been an active member of the Jewish community politically for some time. I mean, that's where she cut her teeth and got into politics as a member of parliament. Trudeau probably never paid attention to any of her work because she is a woman. And he doesn't really care or think much of women. We've established that. But maybe he should have realized even her name, Lanceman, she wasn't Irish. And it doesn't matter. Even if she wasn't Jewish, that statement was repugnant. Nobody was standing with swastika flags, aside from one weird one in the background that nobody's ever been able to determine what it is. But that's what the leader of this country, this irresponsible twit, is using. And it's making international news. Now, Fox News interviewed Lanceman last night. And we'll pull up that image and check out the caption they put on the screen while they talk to Melissa Lanceman. It says, blackface enthusiast equates support of truckers with support of swastikas. You know, I mean, it's good in tongue-in-cheek. It's funny. He's a blackface enthusiast. It's showing the hypocrisy of this idiot prime minister we have, you know, and showing his own intolerance with this. But you got to remember, this is Fox News. Americans are watching this, guys. We should be embarrassed. This is going across the country, around the world. And they're laughing at us because we've put this clown at the head of our country. And we've given him the power and ability to invoke the War Measures Act, which is now called the Emergencies Act. He is suspending civil rights in this country, a man of such a sick nature, as I talked about before. And he is now making national news where they make fun of, yes, the blackface aficionado. They don't even refer to the prime minister. We're stuck with this fool. You know, Jagmeet Singh is the only one holding him in power right now, in a sense, because Trudeau needs the support of the NDP to get the Emergencies Act through. And as Dave was saying, it might not even be until Monday till they get that vote now. There's still time to get out of this act. And even a Bloc MP heckled Singh about this, saying, you know, think carefully before voting for this Emergencies Act because of how dangerous it is. The Bloc certainly knows that Quebec was not happy with the invocation of this in the first place. So we can get out of this. It doesn't have to come in yet. But I don't know. I don't have much faith in Jagmeet Singh actually caring about citizens. But again, as I was talking about with Michael, you know, Americans are aghast. They don't understand. How are you letting your country be taken over like this? How are you letting your entire country go under what is a form of martial law over what is now just a number of protesters in Ottawa? Could you imagine if there was a big protest in Washington? I think there is just about every month or so. If the president suddenly said, we're going to declare a national state of emergency and suspend civil rights for the entire country, we're going to seize bank accounts from people, we're going to steal their money, we are going to force labor, we're going to bring tow truck drivers and charge them if they refuse to participate with us in clearing out the protest, they wouldn't even consider it. It's not even a thought. Yet here we are. You know, when we're talking about constitutional change, as I was talking about Michael's hard, the way to get constitutional change in Canada, if we were to do it, you need the support of 7 provinces representing over 50% of the population to do it. And of course, you see that never quite happens because, you know, if Quebec isn't in or something, you just won't get the numbers high enough and you won't be able to pull it off. Well, 7 out of 10 provinces right now oppose Trudeau in his strive and his grab to bring in martial law in Canada. 7 out of 10. The only ones that support him are the socialists next door in BC with Premier Horgan. And Newfoundland's premier supports this move. And of course, Ford, who has been a terrific disappointment, is supporting it in Ontario. But aside from that, all 7 of the other provinces say, Prime Minister Trudeau, you do not need to impose this act. We don't need it. It's an overreach. It's too far. But he won't back down. He digs his heels in. Like I said, this whole becoming a laughingstock over his stunt in the House, and as somebody was saying, he just keeps walking out of question periods now. He can't face it. He gets too weak. He can't think on his feet. You saw what happens when he tries to think on his feet. But he won't even apologize. Like, dude, you screwed up. Just apologize. Look what you've said, what you've done. Instead, it's making news all over North America and probably the world. And this guy is too stubborn, too sociopathic to say, I'll back off. And even now, I mean, we're going to see action on the protests this weekend. I think it's getting pretty clear. You know, the police are massing, they're gathering, and they're probably going to move. You know, as Dave was talking about, Tamara Litch, one of the organizers, is pretty confident she's going to be arrested in the next couple of days. We'll see. And whatever happens, this is before the act is even implemented. The borders were cleared without the act. Those protests were stopped. We don't need this. We don't need this rebranded War Measures Act coming in. But Trudeau has now made it a point of pride, and he would rather rip this country to shreds, and that's what he's doing, than back off on a line he's drawn in the sand with our rights. What a scary place to be, and a scary thought, and unimaginable in most countries that respect and understand the need for freedoms individually and collectively. I got a video at the end of the show I'm going to play too, and that's from Dave Rubin, and we'll play it right at the very end. It's a few minutes long. I'm not sure if he made it, but he did post it, and it covers. It's just something of a parody video, but also it's an American thing, and again, it drives home what they're seeing, what they're thinking when they're looking at what's going on up here, because it's beyond the pale, and we just unimaginable. I don't know what it takes. And as I've been saying before too, I'm going to protests in Calgary this weekend. There's one at 1:00 Saturday at Memorial Park downtown. If you go searching, and again, legal protest, I'm not going to go out and do left-wing style protest. I don't plan on tipping over police cars or throwing rocks or smashing windows or intimidating people or all the good stuff of a progressive protest. But I want to be there to add to the numbers, to say, look, our rights are being infringed on. Let's back off. Let's get it over with. Let's drop these mandates. Let's stop it. It's been 2 years. We've done what we can. Doesn't mean science has to stop working on better medications and improving the vaccinations, but we've got to get on with life. People's lives are being ruined by this. And that's what's driving them out to these protests. That's what's adding to the urgency of this on the part of other Canadians. Shutting this down through force is not going to stop it. The best they could do is scatter them out of Ottawa, and these guys are going to spring up in other places, and things can get dangerous. And we don't need to. We don't. We just need to drop some mandates. And Trudeau hasn't given even an inch on this so far. Not even an inch. It would be so easy just to drop some bloody mandates. You were putting our country under the War Measures Act before you would even remove a mandate for vaccination upon truckers that is serving no reasonable purpose. I mean, what a hill to die on. And we're all paying the price for that. And unfortunately, his socialist ally, Jagmeet Singh, is probably going to give him support on Monday, and he'll pass that bill. It's terrifying. I haven't had much faith in the Canadian system for a long time anyways, but I mean, I never thought we would get to this point. Again, the Emergencies Act, this War Measures Act, again, I'll keep calling it that. I know it drives the Liberal supporters nuts, but hey, I'm going to call it what it is, because by definition, it's martial law. It's suspending the civil rights of citizens for an emergency. And what is it? 400 people in Ottawa? You're going to seize my bank account over that? Potentially? You can, arrest people on the spot. You can stop gatherings. You can infringe on our civil rights. This is what he's bringing in. It's a precedent that we can't abide by. And again, it's making international news. People have been talking about it. They're dumbstruck with it, and so am I. We've got to get out of this one way or another. And as I was talking about with the mandates, the people who were planning to get vaccinated, they did it. So let's start to get a little bit pragmatic here. Let's start to get a little realistic here and see where we can move back. Maybe some people in Trudeau's caucus will offer a bit of reason, try to calm this man down. He really appears to have lost his marbles, and get him to back off on this invocation of this act. I mean, I know not every Liberal MP supports this. There's no way they would want to do this. And there, Nico brought it up. So before I get on to the guest here, this is the text from the Emergency Act. I'm going to read it for the podcast listeners, because this is what the bar is for setting it. Yeah, and we definitely are not in this place. So it says, A, seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians, and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it, or seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. Those are the two reasons why this act could potentially be invoked. Neither of those things are happening right now. Not even close. We've had 3 weeks of protests with tens of thousands of people and no violence. This is unprecedented in how peaceful it is. And there is nobody threatening the territory. See, those things were put in case we were being invaded this was in case the aliens were landing, or this was in case our American neighbors did suddenly get expansionist and decide to come up and try and take a province or something, which wouldn't be so bad these days, I think. Either way, speaking of our American neighbors, I'm going to bring a great one in, and that's Spike Cohen. He's in the lobby there, and we're going to have a good talk. Hey, Spike, thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And no, we have no, as far as I know anyway, we have no plans to invade. So
no, I didn't.
Easy.
You don't want this. But I'll give a bit of background on you too. I mean, you've been quite, visible in social media and in a lot of media throughout the States. You ran as a vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party of the United States. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada on tomorrow, but our version of the party isn't nearly as well developed as you guys down there. So I hope we can learn from you guys and get a better liberty movement going on up here. As you can see, we really need it.
Yes, it definitely so. One thing that I don't know if this was mentioned before I came on to wait for my segment, but this is inadvertently causing a run on the banks. Because part of this Emergencies Act or War Powers Act, whatever it used to be called, being invoked, one of the things is that they're going to try to find anyone who has given any kind of monetary help to the Freedom Convoy, whether they donated on GoFundMe or Give, Send, Go, or whatever the other site is, or any other possible construing of giving monetary support to them, which is causing people to pull their money out of the banks. And of course, because you have the same type of fractional reserve banking system we do, for every dollar that's actually in the bank, there's actually as much as $100 or more out in circulation. So, or the money that they're holding, that the banks claim to hold, there's only about maybe $1 being held. So it's not easy. It's not hard to have a run on the banks. Typically, they have just enough to keep what is a typical expected amount of withdrawals in their holdings. But this could potentially cause a bank run, which is going to cause a whole other set of issues, especially during all the other problems that are going on in Canada.
Yeah, as if we didn't have enough economic issues going on with this whole pandemic. That we just posted record inflation numbers again, which are just chilling with how fast that started. But everybody saw it coming. I mean, you're printing money like crazy. You're spending like crazy. Any economist worth their salt's going to say, hey, guys, you're going to get inflation. And, of course, they're all pretending they're shocked by it now. And, but, I mean,
as always.
Who would have thought that they'd come in and actually that's what they're looking to do is to steal your money. They want to come into the banks and take your money. Of course, people are moving it and pulling it out as fast as they can. And it's going to have consequences far deeper than they think.
Oh, there's many different examples of this. Now, I realize that the honking and the bouncy castles are a threat to the very sovereignty and integrity of the Canadian nation. But I do think that there could have been other ways to deal with this. One thing that keeps sticking out is Justin Trudeau kept saying every option is on the table. Well, clearly that's not the case, Justin, because there is one option that completely ends all of this and would actually have you hailed by the people that are protesting, as well as a good sizable portion of the country, and probably have little to no effect at this point on the course of the virus or the pandemic. And that's just ending the mandates. If you believe that these vaccines are an effective way of stopping or slowing the pandemic, something like 85% of Canadians are already vaccinated, and something like 90% of the truckers are vaccinated. Mission accomplished at that point, right? I mean, unless you're saying that you need that extra 8% to get vaccinated, or else it's all for naught. And of course, if you don't believe that the vaccines are helpful, then it doesn't matter. The mandate's not effective either. But either way, there's no need for a mandate, unless, of course, you want to plunge the country into further turmoil at a time of record high inflation, at a time of, it's funny talking about this, it's literally everything we have going here minus the protests, but the inflation and everything else, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, but I mean, one thing that you guys do have stateside is I was talking to a political scientist actually prior to you as a guest, is checks and balances. Like, you were a nation built out of revolution. So you had a lot of things built into your constitution to ensure that people were protected from the government. We unfortunately sort of evolved out of the feudal system into the parliamentary system, and it still kind of keeps the state as being the supreme body, and we have to fight for our rights. And it puts us in a terrible position in times like right now.
Absolutely. We're seeing that play out, right? The reason we don't have some of the stronger vaccine mandates that Canada has and other countries have is precisely because the states or many of the states fought against it, took it to court. The courts blocked it. So there's many checks and balances, not just within the federal system, but then also within the interaction between the states and the federal government. On the flip side of that, though, is Canada doesn't have nearly the brutal militarized police state that the U.S. has, or at least not the same numbers that the U.S. has. So whereas we don't have the same types of restrictions being put in place, if we were to have this kind of even a peaceful protest against a nationwide attempt to blockade and protest, this would be put down very quickly, and a lot of people would disappear for several weeks. So it's one of those best of time, worst of time things. But yes, this is a perfect example of the more you can frustrate government within itself and have it fighting with itself over what powers it can and can't have, and actually incentivize politicians to grandstand against each other instead of us. That's a better system. And yeah, that does indicate that government's not a really good way of doing things, but it is what it is. The more you can have it frustrate within itself, the better for the people.
Yeah, well, and I was saying earlier, I'm hoping that maybe out of this chaotic mess, we'll finally get the more critical discussion on our system as a whole, because a lot of it's failed on many, many levels right now. And yeah, your point's very good. Like, one of the issues I think that led to the panic, and it is panic, I think, on the part of the Prime Minister as well, is that they realized they couldn't quell the situation in Ottawa. That the Ottawa police chief was saying, we've got all the officers we can. They're on overtime. They're tired out, and we have a microscopic military force. So, I mean, even if they wanted to, they didn't really have the logistical means to be able to bring this under control.
Exactly.
And they still don't, even imposing this act. They're just hoping that if they can abuse citizens economically, and now they've leaked, of course, our state broadcaster has been leaking the information of people who donated to those GoFundMe accounts, and they're starting to be publicly shamed. It's a frightening scene we got going on up here.
It is very frightening. There's something I say very often. It's a common refrain of mine, and it's government power doesn't actually exist. There's what the people are willing to tolerate. And especially in a country like Canada that doesn't have as large and let's say robust of a militarized police state that exists in the US and in China and many other countries as well, in even greater degrees or greater proportions. They can't stop the convoy. Like, literally, there's no violence happening. There's no revolution happening. There's literal bouncy houses and bounce castles and children playing in the streets. This is about as Canadian of a revolution as I've ever seen. I have to joke. We joke that Canadians are polite to a degree we can't even understand, and here it is playing out. But in all reality, this is not a violent takeover or an insurrection or anything like that. It's, like you said, tens of thousands of people saying, no, we're not going to leave. And the government is utterly powerless to stop that. And I'm not sure that the addition of the RCMP into this or the Canadian military is going to provide the numbers that they need to be able to do that. I think they're banking on enough of the Freedom Convoy people just getting scared and stopping. If they were going to get scared and stop, I think most of them probably would have already. So I think that this is going to potentially backfire in showing the entire rest of Canada that no, you actually can just resist the government. There's not a heck of a lot they can do about it to you as a collective. Maybe the individuals they can make examples out of, but that's going to have repercussions for your overall crime rate. A lot of common criminals are watching this. Violent criminals are watching this and saying, I guess we can do whatever we want. We don't have to be nearly as concerned as we used to be. And a lot of just everyday Canadians who typically just comply with a bunch of stuff that doesn't usually make sense to them just because it's the easier way to do it. They're looking around and saying, well, if they don't have to obey, why should I have to obey? There are many repercussions, both good and bad, that are going to come when an increasing number of Canadians realize government has no real power other than the consent of what they're willing to put up with. And that has all sorts of potential ramifications for the immediate and the future.
Yeah, well, and a symbol of how many Canadians stood up, and it's getting understated a lot, is, I mean, well over 100,000 people, individuals, donated to those fundraising accounts. Actually, it's getting into the hundreds of thousands. And in a nation of 30-some million people, that's very significant. I think it wasn't even the dollars so much. They didn't like that symbol showing this is much bigger than just the few people on that hill. Because some people, they couldn't afford, or they don't have the time or the means to get out to a protest, but they want to support it. They're upset too. So they say, well, I'm going to toss them a few bucks. And now, like I said, we have the state-owned CBC that is actually doxing people who donated to it. You know, somebody hacked the site and got the names of people and companies that donated.
Yep.
Like, this country is getting divided, you know, neighbor on neighbor, family member to family member. And our prime minister just keeps throwing fuel on the fire every time he gets an opportunity. I mean, he won't hesitate to call everybody who supports this movement a Nazi. He even called a Jewish member of parliament that yesterday, which he won't apologize for.
Of course not.
I fear for where we are going. I really do.
Well, he has created a hill, and it appears he wishes to proverbially or die on it. I'm not saying literally die on it, but he's certainly found his hill that he wants to fight on. And that hill is that this is a fringe minority of people with unacceptable views, almost all of whom are racists and Nazis and homophobes. And I remember he put out something about homophobia, transphobia, and anti-Semitism, and that was condemned by what was being done by the convoy. And I said, who's even brought up trans people during this? Like, he just threw out every phobia or ism he could against this, but the narrative has always been this is a small, exceedingly fringe minority. Well, if that's the case, why can't the entire government of Canada stop them? And yes, of a percentage of the Canadian population that's actually out there, you know, refusing to leave, yes, that's a small minority, but that's true of protests in general. And this has been going on for weeks. And the sheer amount of support that they've been getting, yeah, this is fringe minority is not what this is. And what's been very striking to me is that, you know, the part of the narrative has been, including in the US against this, has been, well, 90% of the truckers are vaccinated. So clearly that means that, you know, the vast majority of truckers are against this, and the vast majority of Canadians are against this. Well, most of them were coerced into doing so. So you're saying, oh, well, you know, 80% of this population complied with being forced to do something. Surely they're not against being forced to do something. I think we've seen that a lot of the people that are out here are saying, I'm vaccinated. Some of them are even saying, I chose to get vaccinated. But this needs to be a choice. People need to be able to make informed, consenting decisions on whether or not to get vaccinated or any other health decision. This is a personal decision. You know, this is a perfect example of a fight for bodily autonomy. And even my opinion about the vaccine is irrelevant. You know, that we should support people's bodily autonomy.
Well, it comes down to the liberty issue. That's where, of course, you're the ideal guest to talk about with that. And I'm one of those. I support this convoy. I love seeing citizens standing up and pushing back. And I'm vaccinated. I chose to be. Yep. And I never for a second want it to be not a choice for somebody else. And don't you dare try to speak on my behalf and say I don't support that convoy. I will speak for myself on that. And lots of people do. And even of those, you know what, 10%, 15% of Canadians who've chosen not to become vaccinated, well, that amounts to millions of people. So as a national leader, to dismiss such a large segment of your population, to villainize such a large segment, to divide them, that is terribly irresponsible. And that's not doing your job.
Yep, it isn't. And it's increasingly on anti-scientific terms, which is ironic because all they ever say is, you know, data and science. Well, data and science shows us, from what I've seen, that the vaccine is safe and it is, or generally safe, and it is generally effective in preventing severe illness. The Omicron variant has proven that vaccination rates are not going to have anything to do with whether this virus sticks around or not. If the Delta variant hadn't helped drive that home, the Omicron variant, breaking all previous records for case numbers in North America and around the globe, despite the highest levels of vaccination we've ever had, it doesn't stop the pandemic. And so the argument that it's a public health issue and you're a bad person if you don't do it, and, you know, we need to force people to do this in order to stop the pandemic, that is patently false. You are well past the Canadian population, and the trucker population especially is well past any number that would cause herd immunity if the vaccine was actually going to stop COVID, stop people from getting it, and stop community transmission. So even if you think that bodily autonomy should be contingent on the greater good or public health, which I do not, I think that any attempt to mandate someone's personal decisions that don't directly affect someone else are always going to end poorly and are inherently immoral. But even if you did think that, we know that's not the case with this. There is no good argument for this not just being a personal health decision to be made under informed consent or lack thereof.
No, I mean, if it was working like crazy, it would still, likewise, it would grate on me to say you can impose this on people. But there would be a bit of justification if they say we're wiping out this whole thing, we're dealing with it, it's working, and it's not.
There'd at least be an argument, right? There'd at least be an argument,
But
exactly.
there's nothing. I had a commenter, Kathy Wheaton, and she brought up a good point. We're kind of wondering, so you're hearing a lot about us with our insanity up here. Has there been much movement with American truckers, though? Because there's a lot of unvaccinated American truckers who are dealing with the same difficulty trying to come back and forth. We do a lot of trade with each other. It's very important to a lot of people.
Absolutely. So there has been quite a bit of talk about a American equivalent of a freedom convoy. There have been some small trucker protests. Things are a little different in America in that Canada, both demographically and geographically, is very well suited for several tens of thousands of truckers to shut down entire parts of the country. You have large population centers that have large, you have just a couple of highways that are connecting them. You don't have these big mega population centers that overlap into each other like we have in many parts of the U.S. You also have a very high percentage of owner-operator truckers, much higher than in the U.S. So there's a lot of factors there that make this something that was a uniquely Canadian way of protesting and being as effective as it has been. With that said, I mean, yes, there already are some trucker protests and protests in support of the truckers. I do think that we're going to end up having the American version of the Freedom Convoy, but for a variety of reasons, I'm not sure it's going to have. Another reason being we don't have quite as strict of the restrictions at the federal level. At this point, there are very few restrictions at the federal level. So I think a lot of our protests will likely be targeted against specific states or even specific cities, large major metro areas that have very high restrictions that are comparable to what you have. So I don't think it's going to be the same, but that we're already seeing some of that here.
Yeah, well, and something that might come about. I've had a lot of people, of course, debating on this, saying, well, you're wasting your time up here in Canada demanding this because the Americans have a vaccine policy as well, and the truckers won't be able to come back and forth anyhow, even if we lift the Canadian one. But that's in my view, it's a vacuous two wrongs make a right sort of argument.
Yep.
Let's get rid of ours first, and it's going to bring a great deal more pressure about down there to get rid of that one as well. I mean, you have to start somewhere, and looks like we got a lot of people ready to start.
Well, and we have been advocating from the beginning, freedom lovers have been advocating from the beginning to end this requirement that people come in, especially people coming in for work, not even coming in to stay, but coming in for a specific work-related purpose, like a trucker that's bringing goods to and from the U.S. and into Canada or onto the Mexican side as well, requiring them to be vaccinated. Again, science and data, when you look at the science and data, the spreading hasn't happened because of truckers bringing in goods or taking goods out. The spreads have largely been in two things: large events, very, very large events, and relatively smaller family setups where, someone's going into a greeting of or a meeting of maybe a dozen or so people in a small, poorly ventilated area, like a house. So, I mean, the things that they're fighting against are nonsensical. But that's like in the U.S., we have a requirement that all healthcare workers now, or effectively all healthcare workers, have to be vaccinated. And that has led to a lot of layoffs. And so now, again, this was to slow the spread. And now, because of the shortage, they're now telling vaccinated healthcare workers who have active COVID infections that they have to come back to work as long as their symptoms aren't too bad. They literally have COVID. We have to get rid of the unvaccinated healthcare workers, the vast majority of whom do not have COVID. And it doesn't really seem to matter all that much, at least, whether you're vaccinated or not, whether you can spread COVID. But we got to fire them for public health. But we got to bring back the vaccinated the healthcare workers, I guess we can call them COVID workers, healthcare workers that have COVID and can much more easily spread it to someone than someone who doesn't have COVID. It's nonsensical. It makes no sense. It only makes sense if you look at it from the filter of what creates more power and control for government. Then everything they do makes sense. If you try to make it make sense under their terms of why they say they're doing it, it looks like they're a bunch of fools. And I don't think they are fools. I think they just want more control.
Yeah, well, that's it. And you're closing off on exactly what I wanted to say. I mean, this is obviously not about health anymore. It's about control.
Yeah.
And that's always what the battle actually comes down to when it comes to citizens versus government anytime. And this has brought it to a head. I just hope that we fight our way out and maybe into more liberty. I still always got to maintain optimism because otherwise I won't be able to sleep at night.
Absolutely.
Even if it's a tough go. But thank you very much for joining me today. Where can people find more information on where you're at and what you're up to? I see you all over the place, seeing you on Fox and other such spots. But where can we keep track of you, Spike?
Well, so if you're looking for me on social media, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube, I'm on TikTok for the kids. If you look for Spike Cohen, you'll find me. My website is spikecohen.com. And that also has a listing of upcoming events. If you're in the States, or if you're vaccinated and in Canada and want to come down to the States, then you can come out to an event, and I'd love to get to meet you in person. But yeah, website is spikecohen.com, and I'm Spike Cohen on all the major social medias.
Excellent. I really appreciate being able to talk to you today. I hope we get the chance to do it again soon and keep fighting that good fight down there.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on again.
Great, thanks. So yes, that was Spike Cohen, and yes, you just Google that name and you'll find him quite quickly. I like getting that perspective. I mean, it's not often we make that much news down in the States. That's a part of that Canadian insecurity we demonstrate quite often, actually, with we get shocked or excited when we even our American cousins even pay attention to us, or we see them on mainstream shows or things like that. But right now they are watching us all the time. We are dominating American news, unfortunately, not really in a good way. Going a little further with some of the stuff he's talking about, the ridiculousness and the backtracking, I'll go through some news stuff. So this is on I believe it's going to be on our website if it isn't already. There's an internal letter to CNRL employees, Canadian Natural Resources, who were put on unpaid suspension because they wouldn't get vaccinated. There it is. Yes, somebody see Mel's right on that. And now they're reviewing their policy and they're polling their employees on their intention to return. How nice. We sort of basically fired you for a while, but we're kind of shorthanded now and the oil prices are high. And, would you think about coming back? I don't know. I'm not one of those employees. But I would offer them, a good strong middle finger and say, you know what, there's a lot of energy companies that are certainly booming with these high oil prices right now. And I will consider going to one of those before I'll come back to you clowns. You fired me, kiss my butt. But that's up to those individual employees. But it's similar to what Spike was talking about with down there, that you can bring in these mandates, you can come up with these ideas. But when push comes to shove, you can't afford to keep firing these people. You need them. And it's crashing. And again, let's get rid of these mandates. Let's quit being stupid. Well, that's a big ask, isn't it? So what are we seeing here? Yes, the cabinet, Dave talked about that too. So they're not going to issue any medals. This is a side thing, but this shows some of the lack of pride in Canada. And this is a different thing, I think, reading into what's happened here. If we look back into the last Canada Day, over all of the residential school graves and things like that, and Justin Trudeau put our flag at half-mast for months and months and months at a time. And we were told not to wave flags on Canada Day. I remember talking to a server from a bar who was told not to wear red on Canada Day, even while serving, to avoid getting backlash from people on it. That's how ridiculous it got. We're supposed to hang our heads on the day that we celebrate the creation of the nation. Well, Cabinet is now not going to issue any medals in observance of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So, it's a big turning point for the Queen. And often, traditionally, the Department of Canadian Heritage would offer these medals, to significant and distinguished Canadians and people like that. But this time they said, nah, we're not going to do it. Why? Well, because we've got, again, Queen Victoria had her statue ripped down by extremists. It's funny, when it comes to conservative protesters, if you hang a flag off a statue, you're some demon from hell. But if you are of a left-wing protest and you tear down Queen Victoria's statue, well, shit happens. So this anti-monarchy, anti-history, hang your head in shame attitude in Canada is spreading further. And even during the Queen's Jubilee, her Platinum Jubilee, they're not going to be giving out any medals because they feel it's embarrassing. We don't want to talk about our history anymore. This country is falling apart. And, it's not just legislatively. We're looking at in pride. We are not feeling unified. We are not feeling proud of our nation. Well, the Western nation could be one to be proud of. We could build that. But this is where they're going. I mean, a senator said it's inexplicable on this. He's a medal advisory group. And he said, I can only speculate the decision was made because the previous conservative government was in favor of it. Maybe, maybe not. As I said, I think it ties more into the whole, let's be ashamed of being Canadian and not celebrate anything. So again, in talking to Spike, he's talking about the bank run. He's talking about them running out of money. Isn't that great? People are pulling their money away. Or if they're not pulling out actual cash, they're transferring it to other things. One of the areas you can transfer it to, and I'm going to talk about our sponsor again, Bitcoin Well. These guys will help you get out of the control of the government. You can take control of your money. You can set up your own wallet. They will set you up with it. Move some funds. Take part in that run and get it into Bitcoin. These guys, they're for people who aren't sure about it. If you haven't looked into it, it's a nice educational site. They lead you through because it's a confusing world. It's new. I mean, there's no such thing as this, 20 years ago or something. So you go to bitcoinwell.com/learn, and they've got what they call Bitcoin Academy. And it's set up and partnered with PowerED by Athabasca University. And it's free. So you can actually take some courses online to make yourself more comfortable, know more about it, find out what it's about. There's corporate plans. Derek and I were talking about that the other day. Part of my wage actually comes in, and it's a matching program with Bitcoin. I get a little bit of my wage in Bitcoin, and it goes into a wallet, and the government can't get it. It's not a heck of a lot in there yet, but I'm hoping it'll build. So check those guys out, bitcoinwell.com, and look what they can offer you, help you take control of your money. So, yes, we're getting back on. Oh, yeah, I think we talked a little bit about that, a little more. The common speaker, just the shame of our mainstream media, speaking of which, anyways, in general. It's why alternative media like us is important. The speakers offered reporters armed guards at the taxpayers' expense after the Parliamentary Press Gallery complained it was troubled by the Freedom Convoy protesters. So we'll spend some dollars. These guys, I don't want to see anybody threatening media members. I doubt it's happening much in more than just people being rude to them and things such as that. I'm going to be going to the protest again in Calgary this weekend, Saturday, 1:00, Memorial Park. And I saw there before a global truck drove by. That was a couple weeks ago when I went to those protests, and people were hollering at them and calling them fake news and a few things, but they weren't getting aggressive with them. But I can see why they're feeling uncomfortable. You know what? You guys made your bed. The legacy media coverage of this whole thing as it's unfolded has been nothing less than repugnant. The slanted, crappy, garbage coverage. And I'm talking from the talk radio that I listen to on the way in the mornings to CTV that I run as a diet plan because I'm eating supper and I keep CTV news on the TV while I eat. And, as I watch that wretched slanted coverage up there on the television, it ruins my appetite and I don't eat as much. So I should be able to get down to pant size. There's one benefit of the mainstream media, but aside from that, they're crap. And people are seeing that. They've been exposed for that. And yes, the protesters won't talk to them. And don't get violent with them, but don't talk to them. Don't give them the time of day. They aren't worth it. You do know they're going to slant it. There's still some good journalists out there. There's still some good columnists. Look around. But boy, they're getting fewer and fewer and far between. And some of the good ones are on pressure from above not to give balanced coverage. That's the reality. That's what's happening out there. We don't have that here. The westernstandardonline.com. I'll get that other plug in there for us. And Nico, of course, has that up there. Take out a membership, guys. Share it, share, and be sure to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all of those, because that's how we can keep bypassing things. Rumble, of course. If you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, subscribe on Rumble as well, because you just never know. We could get punted off one of those big platforms. Rumble won't do that. We want to always make sure we can get the voice out there. And share it with your friends. Share this show, share the Western Standard. You can buy memberships for other people to get on, or you can get a trial membership. And there's corporate memberships available as well. If you want to get memberships so your employees are getting good coverage and reading the Western Standard and the stuff that Dave and Mel is putting up there. So thank you all who have, subscribed already. I really appreciate it. And they're still subscribing. It's still building. And we don't have to live under that crap from the mainstream media. So I'm going to let you go with a video. And this was posted by Dave Rubin. His podcast is fantastic. He's got a huge following online. And I don't know if he made it, but he posted it, and it's got his branding on it, and it's just great. And it just kind of lays out where Canada's sitting. And remember, this is an American commentator. This is what they see of us right now, and they've hit the nail right on the head. And we'll run out the show with that. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow at 11:30. I got Jay Hill on there, and I've got Jacques Boudreau, the head of the Canadian Libertarian Party.
For God's sake, don't touch it.
Good evening. Sit down and have a little chat. There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak.
It has to stop.
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act. The police will be given more tools to restore order.
And where once you had the freedom to object, to think and speak as you saw fit, you now have censors and systems of surveillance coercing your conformity.
These changes cover all forms of transactions, including digital assets.
There were a myriad of problems which conspired to corrupt your reason and rob you of your common sense. Fear got the best of you.
The consequences are becoming more and more severe.
And in your panic, you turned to the now High Chancellor. He promised you order, he promised you peace. And all he demanded in return was your silent, obedient consent.
And if you're still participating, the time to go home is now.
Fairness, justice, and freedom are more than words. They are perspectives. So if you've seen nothing, if the crimes of this government remain unknown to you, but if you see what I see, if you feel as I feel, and if you would seek as I seek. And remember, people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.